125,000 years ago, the world was in the grip of an ice age. North Africa, once grassland, became a vast desert. And struggling to cope with these changing conditions were the humans who lived there. These people were hunter-gatherers. As Africa dried up, they had to travel farther to find food and drinking water. About 80,000 years ago, according to one theory, many of them left Africa entirely. We conclude this from studying the artifacts and human remains found in East Africa. Archaeologists can tell us in astonishing detail how these people lived. They designed tools with care, understood the seasons, and knew when game animals would return from their seasonal migrations. The decision to leave Africa may have been influenced by looking across the Red Sea, where ample rain had watered the inviting green hills of modern-day Yemen. Once outside of Africa, these travelers split up. Some going north and west, some going east and south. They went their separate ways, never to meet again. Some would head for the Middle East and Europe. Others would continue east, beachcombing their way along the coast of the Indian Ocean, looking for warmer, gentle places to stop, eventually reaching Malaysia and even Australia. The descendants of these first migrators would make journeys of their own, thanks to an improving climate. About 50,000 years ago, the ice age that caused humans to leave Africa came to an end. Monsoon rainfall increased in Arabia and India. Rivers swelled and game spread north. Humans followed the Tigris and Euphrates rivers from the Persian Gulf to the Middle Eastern lands along the Mediterranean Sea, tracing an arc that would become known as the Fertile Crescent. These families in the Fertile Crescent established the first successful human colonies there, more than 10,000 years ago. Here they would learn how to grow crops and keep animals. The rivers provided water to irrigate crops. There were plenty of fish and reeds to build houses and boats. Date palms grew in abundance. Later, the descendants of these first families would build stone structures that would become the cities of Mesopotamia in modern Iraq. The first steps had been taken to the great civilizations that would invent writing, develop warfare, and build empires. For the people who migrated into Asia, North and South America were the final frontiers. According to one theory, hunter-gatherers pursuing woolly mammoths into Siberia eventually came upon the Bering Strait, the narrow channel between Asia and North America. This was the last great journey to populate the world. And like all other migrations, it was dictated by climate. 25,000 years ago, the world was moving into another ice age. The seas began to recede, and out of the Bering Strait emerged a land bridge connecting the two continents. This allowed groups to migrate to North and South America. Around 10,000 years ago, humans had traveled to every corner of the globe, the most incredible and important journey we have ever made.
Prehistoric people had no cities, central governments, or systems of writing. This makes it especially difficult for us to learn about how they lived. Without written records, scientists must depend on other evidence to learn about the prehistoric past. Usually they work with artifacts like tools and pottery. But in 1991, they got a lucky break. Hikers in the Alps stumbled on the body of a man, mummified and frozen, melting out of the ice. But this wasn't the body of one of the hikers who go missing every year in this alpine region. This was a man who had died more than 5,000 years ago. He's the oldest human mummy ever found, a man 5,300 years old. Scientists call him Ötzi, or the Iceman. An arrowhead lodged in the Iceman's back suggested that he was murdered. Ötzi was an immediate archaeological sensation. Research teams eagerly studied both the mummy and his incredibly well-preserved gear.
Next check now.
A copper axe, an unstrung bow with a quiver of arrows, a flint knife, leather shoes, a woven grass cloak, and goatskin leggings. Could these remains tell them who he was, how he lived, and why he died up here in the mountains? Many researchers thought that Ötzi must have been an alpine shepherd, leading goats and sheep to high-altitude pastures in the summer. Shepherds today still herd livestock along the same path where Ötzi was found. If Ötzi was a shepherd, perhaps he was murdered for his sheep. Anthropologists Hans Platzgummer and Sylvia Reinhardt and archaeologist Anna Pedrotti decided to test this theory. They started by making an exact duplicate of Ötzi's clothes. When they were done, Hans donned the outfit. He would find out firsthand whether it could have held up to the tough life of an alpine shepherd. As Hans set off up the mountain on foot, Sylvia and Anna took an easier route by helicopter. For Hans, it was a grueling 4,000-foot climb to duplicate the Iceman's journey. From the mountaintop, Sylvia and Anna could see that Hans was having trouble. Modern-day shepherds use shovels to help them climb. Hans resorted to using the Iceman's axe. At last, he arrived exhausted. The three researchers examined the gear to see how it withstood the climb. His shoes were a disaster. They had no traction and they didn't keep out the water at all. But the cloak felt as warm as a winter jacket. The mysterious unstrung bow became the perfect climbing staff, and the copper axe helped Hans anchor himself on steep sections of the climb. But the poor performance of the shoes is the clincher.
This experiment went very good because it's the first time that we had the idea that we use the bow and also the axe for climbing up. And also we see that the shoes are totally broken and it's wet inside. And this is the result of the experiment. That's very good.
The poor performance of the shoes indicated that Ötzi probably wasn't a shepherd. Someone wearing shoes like this couldn't make a 4,000-foot mountain climb regularly. But if Ötzi wasn't a shepherd, why was he up here? One possibility is that Ötzi was involved in a fight in the valley below, was badly wounded, and fled up the mountain where he died. In the years ahead, researchers will continue to study Ötzi. They are confident that in time, the Iceman will reveal the story of his life and death.
The Nile is the longest river in the world, flowing more than 4,000 miles through Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. Every summer, the Nile floods because of heavy rainfall in Central Africa. When the floods recede, they leave behind silt, a layer of rich topsoil that transforms the otherwise barren desert into fertile farmland. It was along this river, and because of it, that Egyptian civilization rose and flourished some 5,000 years ago. The Nile was Egypt's most precious resource, but Egyptians had to cooperate to make it work for them. They built complex networks of irrigation ditches to channel the Nile's life-giving waters to their fields. Their need to work together was an important motivator for Egyptians to unite under a single government. Ancient Egypt was made up of two regions, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. About 3100 BC, Menes, the king of Upper Egypt, united the two regions. Menes and his successors used the Nile to keep the nation united. Government officials traveled up and down the river, keeping watch even over the most distant settlements. When necessary, barges carried armies to trouble spots where they would quickly restore order. Egyptian agriculture also revolved around the Nile. In the earliest days, Egyptians relied solely on the river's natural flooding to irrigate the soil. Later, they developed more sophisticated irrigation systems. They dug a series of ditches to capture the floodwaters. When the floods receded, the water remaining in these shallow basins could be used to grow crops. Another important advance was the development of the shadoof, a mechanical irrigation device that made it easier for farmers to bring water from the river to their fields. With a bucket at one end and a weight at the other, the shadoof works like a seesaw. The bucket is lowered into the Nile. Then the counterweight helps the farmer raise the bucket, which can then be poured into irrigation canals to water the fields. The invention of the shadoof led to a dramatic increase in irrigated land. With these methods, the Egyptians grew a variety of crops. Grain, used to make bread and beer, was the main staple. Other food crops included onions, grapes, dates, figs, and pomegranates. Flax was grown to make clothing. Papyrus, a riverbank reed that can grow 15 feet tall, served several important uses. Egyptians made a paper-like material by beating papyrus into flat strips and binding them together. Scribes kept records on these papyrus sheets by using hieroglyphics, a system of picture writing. Papyrus was also used to make various kinds of boats, including sailboats and barges. The Nile was Egypt's chief means of transport. Except between close villages, there were no roads. Virtually everything moved by boat. A steady flow of trade goods moved up and down the river. Gold, agricultural produce, animal hides, and other products from sub-Saharan Africa increased the pharaoh's wealth. The wealth that the Nile generated allowed the pharaohs to erect great buildings and monuments. The pyramids of Giza are the largest stone structures ever built. At one time, historians believed that the Egyptians used only slave labor to build the pyramids. But today, they think that some of the laborers were off-season farmers. The Nile's annual floods made farmers eager to earn money during the 3 months that their fields were underwater. And bakers, carpenters, and water carriers helped support the large crews of builders. They built the pyramids using limestone and other materials found along the Nile. The history of ancient Egypt is tied to the Nile. For 5,000 years, the statues of the pharaohs have stood guard over Egypt. They are enduring monuments to the river and the civilization it helped create.
It's 1,000 times longer than any other man-made monument. Started in 221 BC, it was still being built when Columbus sailed to America in 1492, and millions died making it. When it was complete, it was the most elaborate national defense system ever. China's Great Wall is more than just one wall. There are actually many pieces, built and rebuilt by different rulers over the course of 2,000 years. In fact, if you line up all the walls that we know about, it comes to a total of 35,000 miles, almost enough to stretch around the planet twice. The story of the Great Wall is really a story of China itself. Powerful emperors, rival dynasties, and terrifying enemies. It all began with China's first emperor, Shi Huangdi. He ruled the Qin people, for whom China was named. Originally, Shi Huangdi ruled only a small state in Northwest Asia, but he was an ambitious ruler. He built a huge army, and one by one, he conquered the surrounding states. It was said that Shi Huangdi ate up his neighbors as a silkworm devours a leaf. Then, in the 3rd century BC, the new emperor began building the first Great Wall. Shi Huangdi's wall, made of earth sandwiched between wooden planks, adobe bricks, and rocks, begins in modern central China, stretches across deserts, over mountains and plateaus, all the way to the Korean border. All in all, there are more than 4,000 miles of fortification, built in just 12 years. But it took hundreds of thousands of people to do it. So many workers died, it's been called the longest cemetery in the world. So why did Shi Huangdi commit almost the entire country to building a wall? The answer is fear. To the north of China were nomads, tribes of people with no permanent home. They lived harsh, often violent lives. These nomads had only their animals to provide every basic need: food, milk, and wool hides for clothing and their tents. They had to keep moving to find new places for their livestock to graze. In times of need, these tribes would invade Chinese cities, steal their animals, and kill anyone who resisted. The Chinese were terrified of them. The Great Wall was a barrier between what the Chinese considered the civilized world and the barbarians. When Shi Huangdi died in 210 BC, he was succeeded by the Han Dynasty, who built an even greater Great Wall. The Han restored part of the existing wall and extended it another 2,700 miles into the desert, 6,700 miles in all. The Han Wall, like Shi Huangdi's wall, was built to keep out invaders. But it also protected travelers along the famed Silk Road, an ancient trading route that linked China with Persia, India, and the Roman Empire. Caravans of silk, furs, pottery, and plants left China on this road and returned with gold, ivory, and precious stones. Ideas and inventions were also traded between East and West. From China came paper and gunpowder. From the West came religion, early forms of Christianity as well as Buddhism, the dominant religion in China today. But the Silk Road ultimately took Chinese traders toward the dreaded Taklamakan Desert. Local people used to say of this desert, "Go in and you will not come out." Chinese soldiers were assigned to guard the wall near the desert, to provide additional protection to travelers. 2,000-year-old letters have been found out here, written by soldiers who died protecting the Silk Road.
The moon is shining through a sea of clouds. When we are on guard, all we can see is this desolate landscape, devoid of any sign of life. The memory of our home becomes so painful, our exile seems as though it will never end.
The Silk Road made the Han Dynasty and China rich and powerful. China enjoyed years of peace and prosperity. Today, after centuries of neglect, parts of the Great Wall have been restored. It's no longer needed to defend the country, but the world's greatest feat of human engineering is now the defining symbol of the Chinese nation.
In 206 BC, another dynasty emerged in China, a dynasty so powerful that it would build a wall greater than even that of Emperor Qin, the Han Dynasty. Power would be used to usher in an age of trade, ideas, and economic prosperity. The Han Dynasty of China lasted from 206 BC